So this is panel two. We're on just shortly before lunch. I want you to know that this is the happy panel. What we have here are people who are doing great things in their organizations or in their jurisdictions, and they want to share that with you. I know that we talk about, the challenges and the lack of pay and lack of respect and all of that exists in the sector, but it's not monolithic. Like, we need to keep that in mind, that there's a big difference across the sector, and many of, I'm personally not an ECE, but many in the sector are finding very, very rewarding careers, and some of it is thanks to the folks that you see up here. So I'm going to ask them just one-on-one to introduce themselves, and then we're just going to have a chat, and so they can let us know how they make what works work.
I could yell, but good morning. My name is Linda Cottis. I am a registered early childhood educator, first and foremost. I have a 45-year, almost 46-year history working for the YMCA of Greater Toronto. I'm the Senior Vice President. I'm responsible for 309 childcare locations, 35,000 licensed spaces, just over 4,200 staff. I'm also very pleased to say that I'm an appointed member of the National Advisory Council at the federal level for early learning. I've also been, and waiting for the new minister in Ontario, I've been an advisor at the provincial level to the minister, waiting for him to decide on his structure. I'm a co-chair of the QELN, which is the Quality Early Learning Network. It's 22 not-for-profit, multi-site, multi-service agencies that work together, very focused on improving quality. I also am the chair of the YMCAs of Ontario, working on quality, and I am a part of a national advisory for YMCAs of Canada. I do a lot of things with the YMCA. But I'm also a former member of elected member of the College of ECEs. I was the founding chair of the complaints for 7 years. It was actually very interesting. And I'm a former member of the board for the Canadian Childcare Federation.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Doreen Gillis, and I am the Director of Early Years with the Department of Education and Early Years in Prince Edward Island. I am an early childhood educator who has held various roles within early learning and childcare centers, including frontline educator, special needs assistant, manager of a center. Worked with a large not-for-profit organization in PEI for a number of years as the early learning coordinator, and then moved to government, where I held roles such as early childhood coach, where I was mentoring early childhood educators working directly in the centers, and now I'm the director of early years. I'm very pleased to be here to talk to you today about what's happening in PEI.
Morning, I'm Shireen Gissing. I'm the Manager for Early Childhood Development with the Government of Nunavut, Department of Education. I, like most of you, started in ECE. I was a director. I ran 3 childcare centres all at once. I've been in Canada for over 20 years and moved to Nunavut, and that's where I started running childcare centres for non-profit organisations. It's not easy, I can tell you that.
Only happy thoughts.
Yes, it's not easy, but there is a but. I've also been on multiple boards, so I know what it's like to be a board member and, working with nonprofits and having board members. I then joined the government and was an early childhood educator, an early childhood officer, where I was doing inspections and licensings with the centres. And then I became the manager for the division that oversees all the licensed childcares across Nunavut. And even though we're small, we are growing, and it's really great to see that we are all working towards one thing, and that's for the children and the growth and building a foundation for these children, because we are the ones that build them for the future. And just a reminder, we are not a babysitting service.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sonia Bourgeois. I'm the director of the Toronto Early Learning and Childcare Services for the City of Toronto. There's a lot of staff here from Toronto Children's Services, so shout out. It's easy for us to get here, of course. We're in Toronto. So at the City of Toronto, we directly operate 39 childcare centers. And our spaces are different sizes, so it's really interesting to hear about the YMCA. Many of our childcare centers sort of range in size, 32 spaces to 62 spaces, and a major focus for the city-operated childcare is actually to be co-located in community spaces. So a number of our childcares are actually within Toronto Community Housing, school boards, of course, community centers, and then, of course, some city-owned buildings. But a big piece for me, so I know a lot of the panelists are talking about their backgrounds. I'm not an early childhood educator. Don't boo me out, please. But I'm actually a social worker by training, and I've spent the majority of my career working in community and social services and in the health sector. So many years were spent in policy development at the provincial level, and then the last recent years, which feel like 20 years, at public health during the COVID-19 pandemic. But without going too much into the detail of the city, we actually have a number of different staff that really are fundamental to our operations. So of course we have early childhood educators, but we also have other staff that support the operations, whether that's food service workers, childcare aides, and so I would like to spend some time later talking a little bit about that as well, and how the workforce is made up of different people. Thank you.
So, Linda, we heard earlier today that, we all know that the Y is the largest nonprofit provider in the country. We also are seeing that you are leading the expansion in the nonprofit sector in most parts of the country. Wanted to congratulate you on the great article that appeared in the Globe and Mail celebrating ECEs. And also on your recent study looking that you did through the Standards Council. And we're understanding that you're taking that research seriously and you're actually putting it into practice in the Y. So tell us a bit about how that's happening.
I think for a great many years, the Y was a little bit on the quiet side from engaging with government or putting out a position. We went through a long period of time in which it was be known for what you do, not for what you say. And we matured to a place of we can do both. And so what you have to appreciate about the Y is a federation. So every YMCA is its separate organization. We are not one entity, but we are brought together by Y Canada, and we have shared goals and we have a shared way of working. So through Y Canada, we did the report on if we raise the salaries by 25%, what would be the economic impact? It is a report that is shared at all levels of government and trying to push the agenda related to let's make a change for compensation. In the Toronto Y, which I'm responsible for, we made a significant change to compensation last year, and it changed the world as we know it. We went from constant turnover and change to we now have a retention rate of 96%. Which is very significant. We do have a little problem with the funding because they don't want to pay us, but that's another fight for another day, actually for next week. But I spend most of my time advocating for change, and so I do so at the federal level. We have relationships at the federal level. We build strong relationships with the ministries. the ministry staff, and again at the provincial level. I'm very honored to have been in this space for 45 years and to develop those relationships over time. I have to say the one thing that we do all the time is we talk about compensation and how important it is for the sector to receive very adequate compensation for the outstanding work that is done by the educators every single day. I don't know how much you want me to talk, and then because I have a lot to say, and I could take up the whole hour, but I'll come back later and I'll talk about how we engage our staff.
So moving to PI, we also heard about PI this morning and some pretty impressive statistics. So tell us about what you've been doing there, both in terms of implementation and sort of my key question is, I know you've done many, many things. What's the key thing that you think has made a difference in PI? And if you were to advise anybody in the room and say, this is where you should start, what would that be?
Well, I think that PEI's journey has been one that's happened over the last 14, 15 years. So it didn't happen just since the introduction of CWELC. We started back in 2010 with a real transitional moment where our community-based kindergarten programs moved from the community-based facilities into the public school system. And when that happened, we had, of course, all the 4-year-olds that were, 5-year-olds that were moving into the public system, but also the early childhood educators that were teaching those programs. And they happened to be the most mature, they've been there the longest, the highly educated educators that were moving out. So we were faced with a real pivotal moment because we wanted to ensure that our early learning and childcare centers were going to be sustainable. And so we contracted with a consultant to do a report on what we could do to ensure the sustainability of our system. And we introduced at that point the designated early years centers. So early years centers are licensed full-day early learning and childcare centers that meet additional criteria through designation, and in exchange for that, they receive funding. We've worked very closely back in 2010 and prior to that. We have a very good relationship with the Early Childhood Development Association on PEI. So the ECDA is our provincial not-for-profit organization that really supports early childhood educators and programs with promoting high-quality early learning and childcare across PEI. And so if I was to say what is the most important thing that happened at that time, it was investing in that relationship. The ECDA has the ability to work very closely with those frontline educators and to hear their voices. And so that communication was the most important thing. Now, what came out of that was our publicly managed system that included, a wage grid for early childhood educators where they were recognized for the work they were doing. There was compensation based on their education, whether that be, introductory education, entry level, or a certificate or a diploma. Then the wage grid recognizes those different levels of certification as well as the years of experience. So at the time, the wage grid certainly was one of those key pieces. Now, over the years, that has evolved, and we've introduced a defined contribution pension plan, as well as other supports into the system. And earlier, EMECE was providing some information on a report that we had done, and so the Early Childhood Development Association actually conducted a survey that showed from 2019 to 2024 what was the most important things for early childhood educators, what was keeping you in the system. And while wages are certainly important, it was also working conditions that were making the difference. And so for them, we introduced a pedagogical support position that is over and above the positions that are required just to meet ratio. And that position is to support pedagogical practices within the center, so allowing release time for educators to come off the floor and do their observations and to do documentation, or for those to provide mentoring within the center. And that was really high on the list of what educators said were making the most important differences for them in their centers.
And Shireen, coming from Nunavut, a very vast land with a sparse population, many small providers. How is it that you encourage educators to work in, outside of Iqaluit?
It has its challenges, I'll be honest with you, but just to backtrack a little bit, we started in April of 23 where we gave all ECEs $4.50 wage increase on their wages. And then that was to build the gap between bringing out the wage scale, which came out in October of 23, our wage scale. And it's also based on years of experience, your level of education. Our goal for our wage scale is to increase staff to get their ECE. We don't have many staff in our license centers that have ECE. We're lucky if we have maybe one in the center. So how do we increase staff to get their ECE, which is why we have our wage scale, is that when you get your ECE, you get bumped up, you get more money on the wage scale. That's all great. But then we also have our challenges of where we live. Most of the employees are all employed by the government of Nunavut, so they all have a Northern Living Allowance. So of April 24, we increased our Northern Living Allowance to build that gap between other employees in the town. So it can range from $16,000 up to $34,000 a year based on which community you live in, which has helped a lot because the ECE staff don't get enough compensation. So it's slowly we're building to get there.
Thank you. So Sonia, a little further south, but work in a very you serve a very Toronto is very diverse. The families who use childcare reflect the the composition of Toronto, and so does the workforce. So the city, I think, has a particular responsibility to ensure equity. And you want to talk to us a bit about how you're doing that?
Sure, mic test here. So I wanted to actually pick up a little bit on what Doreen was saying. Of course, wages are fundamental and critical, but looking a bit outside of wages, what drives the workforce? And so just coming back to principles. So I think one of the big pieces is around job satisfaction and employee well-being. And then what does employee well-being mean from an equity lens? So, our workforce is extremely diverse at the city. So we have about 700 frontline staff. And the 700 staff are a real mix of full-time and part-time, and then a mix of pay and salary and benefits. And so the majority of our workforce are cis women, and the largest share of our workforce are racialized women. And so what do we do about that? And a big piece for us at the city is around inclusivity. I think you said it, Carrie, around the families and the children that access our services, but also the staff. Do they see themselves, do they feel seen in some of the broader policy initiatives we're undertaking as a city, in the programming and pedagogical approaches that we're using? And so the city itself has committed to a Confronting Anti-Black Racism action plan. We've also committed to a reconciliation action plan aligned with the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And then where do we take that from here? So one of the things that we've done, it sounds small, but we actually co-developed with staff a decal, a little sticker that's on every single door of all of our childcare centers, and it says "Stronger Together." It has medicine wheel, it has an LGBTQ flag, as well as an African-centric symbol. And so it's also a reminder to the families, because I think some of the earlier presentations also spoke about, I think it was maybe Amisa's presentation around staff discrimination, those feelings. And so sometimes it's also about educating families around the diversity of needs within our staff, within the children that access our services. And we've done a whole host of other things. I think we've talked about a commitment to paying staff, to training. And going back to those principles, I think it's really around career advancement and really demonstrating how we're supporting staff to do that. And we know that for the majority of our childcare sector, people are extremely passionate about what they do. And so how do we reward that passion with professional development and other investments? So kind of along the equity line, we've also thought about employment equity. So we have, I'm sure many folks here know, I've talked about nutrition services. We have food services workers who support all 39 of our centers. And if anyone's seen a hungry child, food is everything. And yet, they work for 3 hours, not necessarily a full-time shift. Similarly, we have childcare aides that are absolutely needed to ensure that we're meeting ratios and also supporting the early childhood education workforce. And those hours are similarly not necessarily full-time with benefits. So a couple of years ago, we actually created a new position. We call it, it's a bit of a mouthful, Childcare Food Services Assistant, CCFSA. I know we all like our acronyms. But really what that did, it kind of brought together those two positions, which is not easy. It has some challenges, but it provided full-time stable work with pay and benefits for those staff. So they sort of split their time between the classroom and the kitchen. And it also allows for integration between nutrition services and some of the fundamental, around food security, access to healthy, nutritious meals. And many of our families actually are experiencing high levels of food insecurity. And so from a policy perspective, it's one small step. We're right now about to kind of fill the complete complement. So every single childcare center would have a childcare food services assistant. But I think it's not easy. We have to focus on what skills are needed for that role. And a nutrition services worker may not necessarily have child-centered skills, and so it's also about building the workforce, investing in them, and focusing on training opportunities.
Well, that is a really great takeoff to what I wanted to ask next. Yes.
Excellent.
Good setup. So we hear that PI has a 98% retention rate now. The Y has a 96% retention rate. So good on keeping staff. Tell us what you're doing to recruit staff.
It was not on my list. I was like, I want to talk about retaining because it's so important. Recruiting staff, I have an entire team that recruits staff. We recruit on the regular. About every month, we're recruiting 65 staff, which is really fantastic because we used to have to recruit 250 a month. So, but we have an entire team, and we have absolute rigor related to their sort of reference check and the onboarding. Of course, we do job fairs, a lot of things. We pay a lot of attention to students who are doing placements. We stay very connected on their journey to graduation and set them up for an interview the day that they graduate. But we would treat them like alumni of the Y. From that perspective, we don't have issues from a recruitment perspective. Of the 4,200, 1,100 are supply staff. And sort of the Y way is you come in as a supply staff, you work as a supply staff, so we're able to see your practice and then move you into a full-time position. A majority of our positions are full-time. The other thing that we are doing, which is exciting through a federal grant, it's called the Bridge to ECE program that we're starting anytime now. And it's working with newcomers to Canada who have a background in childcare and educating them on what it means to work in Canada, doing training with them, and then placing them in our centers, mentoring them, coaching and mentoring, and then giving them either an exit strategy or directing them into more of an apprenticeship type of a program. To build. I mean, we're very focused on building that ECE component, and we encourage all of our ECAs, and we do everything possible to help our ECAs get into apprenticeship programs and then celebrate them and increase their wages when they graduate.
Yes, so as I mentioned, in 2010 we introduced a wage grid, and while that was pivotal, oh, I always have trouble with that word. Why do I even try to say it? Pivotal at that moment. We had a lot of stagnation with our wage grid over a number of years. So we had the wage grid, but there was no real increases, substantial increases that happened to that wage grid. So recruitment was a real issue for a while in PEI. Really proud to say that since 2019, early childhood educators working in designated early years centers at the diploma level have had a 50% increase in their wages, and those in director positions have had a 55% increase in their wages. And so that certainly helped with recruitment. But it wasn't enough. We had to do some other things as well. And with our partnership with the Early Childhood Development Association, we've had a number of recruitment and retention projects over the years. This one I'm going to read so that I get it right. So the Steps to Success project is a project that's funded by the Department of Workforce, Advanced Learning and Population through the Canada PEI Labour Market Agreements and administered by the ECDA of PEI. So we have the Steps to Success program, which complements another program we have in PEI, and that's the Accelerated Early Learning and Childcare program at Holland College. So individuals who are working in our sector who do not yet have a credential either at the certificate or diploma level, they can participate in an accelerated training opportunity, and they actually leave their employment to go be a full-time student, but they earn while they learn. So they stay an employee of the center and receive their full wages while they're a student. And so in order to enable those educators to come out of their center and become a full-time student, the Steps to Success program supports that. So this is a program where it's individuals who are interested in working in early learning and childcare, maybe don't necessarily have a lot of experience or education related to that. And so they come into the center, they receive 3 entry-level courses in early learning and childcare, and they receive a stipend while they're in their workplace training. And so what we're finding, we've been doing this for a number of years now. I'm looking at Jen up there, maybe 2021, this has started. And what we're seeing now is individuals who started through that Steps to Success program are now moving into the Accelerated Certificate program and moving on to the diploma level program. So they're staying. They are invested. They see a career path for themselves. And we also have education grants where they can apply for up to $2,500 per year to support their tuition costs associated with their additional education. So those are a couple of things that are happening in PEI to really support the recruitment and retention. More to come. Jen at the ECDA, they're working hard on some other recruitment opportunities, and we'll be seeing more of that in the coming months.
So just before you go, what we often hear is, in fact, I'll give you this little story. I was talking to your minister when the designated centers were just rolling out, and so the question was, well, yes, you can do this. You're PI, you're tiny, you're all this, like, we could fit you in one of our wards if we wanted to. And his response was, no, it's much more difficult in PEI because people will call up your mom. So, what do you say to those who say, oh yeah, that can happen in PEI, but it can't happen here?
Yeah, no, that's so true. It's a direct line to everybody. There's certainly advantages to being PEI and being small, but all of the work is still there. We still have to do all of the engagement and consultation and listen to what it is we're hearing. What do our educators want? What are we hearing from the families that are in our centers? And then once policy direction or program direction is decided, then all the policy work has to happen. So that's the same no matter what the size of the jurisdiction. Actually implementing, of course, we're on a smaller scale. We have 76 designated early years centers that are part of our publicly managed system, as well as family home centers, whose numbers are growing. When we started with our CWELC, we had one licensed family home center in PEI, but we introduced some supports to really promote family home centers, and now we have, I believe it's 21. So we're growing there. So yes, we're nimble. We can connect we have such a great relationship with our sector through the Early Childhood Development Association that we really can get our finger on the pulse of what is going on in our system very quickly, but the work is all the same. So I would say that it's deciding what is really important and taking the steps to move towards that, and knowing that it doesn't happen overnight. This has been a 15-year journey for PEI, and we're still, making changes and looking at what's worked well and keeping that, but what could we do differently, and making changes based on what we're hearing at the time.
So Sonia, the city is known for the quality of its programming. Parents want to send their children there. We did a study. The Atkins Center was part of doing an evaluation of of Toronto's early years services. You came out on top in quality. You came out on top in terms of wages. You're serving often serving a very vulnerable, members of the community. So why don't we see more programs coming out of the city?
And when you say more programs, do you mean more childcare centers?
More childcare centers.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a great question. And I think a potentially sensitive question, right? Because I think, we need all types of childcare, different auspices. And I think the keynote, the opening presentation was excellent to kind of highlight what QUELC is doing. And so I think for a large part, the City of Toronto is very proud. We try not to be too proud, but we're really proud of the services we deliver and extremely proud of our staff. But it's not an area that I work in, but the City of Toronto is actually the service system manager for the City of Toronto as a whole. So we flow all the funds from the province, and a big push for us has been supporting the sector to adapt to Canada-wide, which certainly is not an easy task. And so, I think a large focus of the city is not necessarily on expanding ourselves, but actually boosting the sector. And so, that's the long and short answer, I would say. I would also say that, I'm sure like maybe some of the YMCA locations, a number of our buildings, our infrastructure needs a lot of love. If you walk around the City of Toronto, you might notice that. And so I think it's really, really focusing on what we have, and then really focusing on the staff. So I do want to just touch a little bit on recruitment and retention. And the presentations this morning were so impactful. And one of the presenters, I can't remember, I made a note about the phrase they said. They said that for the children we care for and we provide early childhood education for, it's so important that they feel safe, loved, and cared for. And I really feel that extends to the staff. And so, interestingly, over the last several years, I talked about the City of Toronto's commitments to anti-Black racism. Our workforce, being largely racialized cis women, didn't see themselves reflected in management, didn't see themselves with a pathway that could lead there. And so within the city in our structure, we have a position, Early Childhood Education 1, ECE 1, wish I had a fancier title for that, but they sort of act as an assistant supervisor. And so that is sort of a pathway. And over the last few years, we've seen the diversity of our management structure being very intentional about shifting who's in the seats of those decision makers and who's sort of at the forefront of management. And I'm thinking of diversity in different ways. I'm thinking of representing the LGBTQ community and then therefore families seeing themselves also reflected. But I'm also really talking about racial diversity as well. And so I'm not from a racialized group, but how do I show up as the director to support the staff? So, the recruitment retention, definitely still a challenge. I spoke about creating the childcare food service assistant position. So the positions that are hardest for us to recruit and retain are the childcare aide positions, sort of the more entry-level, non-college certified, and the food services workers. On the flip side, a really good news story is that many of our childcare aides are actually getting college educated and becoming ECEs. And so that's not a bad story. We want our services to be a pipeline, and similarly for staff to see an opportunity to see themselves in management as well and in career advancement and professional development.
Yes, and that was certainly what we saw in the study of Knowing Our Numbers, which was, racialized staff were more likely to be in the support positions and less likely to be found in the supervisory positions. And that just in itself is a very important part of recruitment. And so the floor now gets open to you. I'll stop asking the questions. You get a chance to ask anything, well, almost anything you'd like from these fine folks. I think I can probably hear you, and I'll repeat it just so that it's ready for the video that we're doing. Come on, I know that if you met them in the hallway, you'd be chewing their ear off right now, so. So I'm going to give a little break here while you think of a question. Shireen, keeping to the topic of diversity, again, Nunavut is very unique, not only, particularly in the diversity of its population. So have you seen, good practices in terms of ensuring that the staff reflect the families that they serve?
For the most part, yes, in our smaller communities. Iqaluit is a growing community, so it's becoming a lot more mixed with different cultures. But in the smaller communities, it's definitely all the staff in centres are Inuit staff.
Okay, question.
I'm just wondering, since you're all here in Texas with the staff workforce, if there's any frameworks or pedagogies that you're using to support staff in the classrooms, behaviors, or if that's helpful.
So, well, all these folks won't be familiar with how does learning happen, but outside of your, your defined curriculum frameworks, is there anything that you're finding very useful in terms of supporting staff around behaviors in classrooms?
Okay, this was more like what my notes were about. Thank you for it. I'll give you some money later. No. I'm really pleased that you asked, because Alana would attest. When we're at National Council, we're at all of these various external meetings. What we talk about is the biggest challenge for educators right now out there is inclusion, is behavior of children, is, we took the minister, the federal minister on a tour, and she was talking to one of the educators, and they said, "How was your day?" well, in this classroom, there are 4 children with autism, there are 3 children with behavioral challenge or finding their way to self-regulation, and 2 children who do not speak English. And so some days are really good. But when we talk about inclusion at all of these tables, everybody nods their head and there's not a single solution. And the problem is that in Ontario, we push it out to the service manager. So we don't have an Ontario vision. What we have is each of the 47 SSMs have a direction on how they support, and it's all over the place, right? From sending in a consultant to here's some money, hire an extra staff. Funding is not the solution. It is part of the solution. But what we are doing, because there are a lot of parallels to Toronto, from the perspective of the diversity of our staff, the diversity of the children, the communities that we're in. However, what we are trying to do is lift the voice of the educators. So we've introduced an equity circle with 4,200 staff. How do I rise up the voices of the educators and have them inform the way forward? And so it is intake. It is the relationship with the family. It is the training that you have. We're very focused. We have a partnership with the Merit Institute on self-regulation. And how do you make it everybody's job? And one of the mechanisms for us to do this is we do a well-being survey with our staff because we want to understand what is your well-being? How are you feeling? And the 3 lowest indicators are recognition, because educators also want recognition from the families, not just their supervisor, but from the families to appreciate their work. Stress management and how they report their own well-being. And it is the issues related to the variety of behaviors, the increased amount of violence that's happening within the centers. So we're taking a lot of steps, but it isn't just advocating for more funding. It's understanding all of the barriers and all of the things that we need to self-correct in order to be very supportive of the educators.
So because I've gone so much off script, I'm going to go from Sonia this way, and you get 3 minutes each to say what you wanted to say, and I didn't ask you about.
Don't we love off script, especially when you get pinpointed as the first person to go off script? Thank you. It's very kind, Carrie. I think I've covered a lot of my points, but I think on this last question, I think we'd be remiss not to talk about, and it came up a little bit in the earlier presentations, about the true impact of COVID-19 on the workforce. People are really tired, and it's definitely something, I'm also tired, I'm sure many of you are too. It's definitely something that our staff are really continuing to feel. And so a lot of, with that comes a little bit of disengagement. People are struggling with mental health. There's all kinds of things going on, not to mention in Toronto, the housing crisis, the cost of living. I think one of the earlier presenters talked about housing for early childhood educators, and that is definitely something we're seeing in our workforce. A number of staff don't necessarily live in the city, and so are commuting longer and longer to sort of get to the city. Anyway, I could go on. I know Carrie's going to give me a nod. Don't talk about all the challenges, but I think, refocusing, we're going to be happy. But truthfully, around pedagogy and programming, kind of bringing staff back to some of the fundamentals, and especially around, we've been talking about professional development, so what are some skills? So I think around children with extra support needs, for example, we're kind of investing in specialized training related to adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, so that's one thing. We also spend a lot of time sort of coaching our staff around what about parents who aren't ready to sort of provide resources to their children with extra support needs. And what I mean by that is maybe in denial about what their children might need. We see that in different ways. And so it's also about building family capacity, and I think that's a way that staff can feel really empowered through seeing progress. I hear stories all the time about a child that, maybe wasn't verbal, and over time the progress. And I think really finding ways to highlight for the staff and for the families those success stories, because that's truly why our staff come to work, right? They're proud of the work that they do.
Well, I'm not going to do 3 minutes, I'll be honest with you, Carrie. It's why are we where we are now? It took a pandemic to get us where we are, which is really scary to think that COVID brought us to realizing how important childcare is. And now we've got to build on that now and make it a stronger and a better place for everybody. That's about me. This is not what I normally do, so.
I'm going to pick up on the question, I think, from PEI's perspective. We know this is an area where we have a lot of work to do, and a few years ago we did work with Dr. David Philpott, who's here today somewhere, whom I'm hoping to connect with soon. There you are, yeah. And Jan Miller-Pitt to work on an inclusion plan and inclusion strategy for PEI, because we know that what's happening as far as supporting inclusion within our centers has a lot of room for improvement. And right now we have a model that funds for additional staff, and we're never going to meet the needs of what we're seeing. The funding, we are continually searching, looking for new funding because the needs are so great. So we know we have to do things differently. So we're building on the work that was presented to us, and we're now in the process of aligning an inclusion plan for early years with the inclusion plan for the K-12 system. And that work is happening now, and we're hoping in the next few months to be releasing some information and some implementation plans for both early years and K-12. One thing that has happened, though, on this front is we did have the opportunity, and early years arranged this and on PEI, so this is my rah-rah moment for this piece. We had Dr. Hanley come from FTF Consulting to do a professional development opportunity on supporting children with extreme behaviors in both centers and schools. And this was a huge conference where we had close to 300 people, and it included early childhood educators, teachers, education assistants, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, youth workers. We had somebody there from every kind of sector that would work with children in PEI. So we were very pleased that that happened, and we want to see more of that because we think there's so much so there's so many benefits from learning together and hearing from and learning from each other's perspectives. So yeah, so that's an area we're spending a lot of time on PEI right now.
I think from an Ontario perspective, look, we've done really wonderful work in Ontario with the implementation of CWELC, and we need to celebrate, and there's still a lot of work ahead, but we should be celebrating the recognition for the sector, the recognition of the importance of the work, how outstanding the educators are, and what a critical part of the family they are. And like this was historical, having CWELC come across Canada. And in Ontario, we're making strides. But the funding formula, the way the funding formula is structured currently, there is no equity built into the funding formula from a compensation perspective. And so if you were paying minimum wage, then that's how you would be funded going forward. In the future, the ministry intends to put wage equity, or we're hoping a wage scale, is what we continue to talk to them about. But it was sort of like whatever you were doing in 2023 was frozen, and that is what you get to pay going forward. And, so the city should celebrate that they are the highest provider, the highest payer. But it isn't equitable. It isn't fair that the city can pay at that level and we pay at a different level, and then you have those that are paying at minimum wage. And so we need to write the funding formula. We need to have the equity throughout the province. And it isn't just based on where you live, like, so there's still work to be done. And I know I'm up for the job. I know Alana and Carolyn are up for the job of continuously advocating to move the needle on recognizing the sector and not based on who's the provider, and to really sort of move towards a quality system. And we will continue to say, how does this decision equal quality? Because so often there's no relationship. It's just a transfer of funds. Anyways, I could go on and on.
So I'm just going to leave you with a final thought before we do our last little bit before you get to go for lunch. And you didn't mention this, Doreen, but it's one of my favorite stories, is the difference that public management makes. And the fact that PI got out there 15 years ago and really thought that it's the government's role to lead. It's the government's role, that the government has a responsibility to ensure that children get the type of service that they deserve. And that takes more than just saying, here's some money and come on down and get it and go out and build your center. And I think that this is where we're seeing some of the disparity, both within regions and across regions. So on that high note, I am going to thank these fine people for the excellent job. Thanks very much for your time coming here.